The coronavirus is far worse than we thought. Good morning, everyone. I'm Chris Martinson with your coronavirus update. It's February 9th, 2020. That coronavirus may be spreading by aerosolization. I will talk with you about what that means in a second because it's a very important concept. But first, just quickly looking through the cases that have come up. We've got more virus cases in Europe. The infection has really spread on that Japanese ship, confirming what we thought about its transmissibility, its R0, its ability to jump from person to person. 5 infected with deadly virus in France, all British, and they got this from somebody who was staying at the same ski resort. Somebody who went to Singapore, came back, and somehow spread it there. This is not SARS. This is looking at total infective cases here as reported, right? I believe the SARS cases were accurately reported as much as can be thought. These numbers here, even where they're reporting 35,000 some cases now, might be off by an order of magnitude, meaning 350,000 cases, or maybe even more than that. We don't know, but this is a low ball. There's no comparison between SARS and this nCoV. And it's not the flu. Not the flu, people. We'll get to why that, all the reasons this is not the flu. So anybody who's still comparing it to the flu is either ignorant or spreading dangerous disinformation. But here we're just comparing the nCoV here in this red line compared to swine flu in the yellow, SARS in the green. There's just no comparison in terms of infectivity between these two. So the WHO, the World Health Organization, has come out, and of course, what are they doing to help everybody get a grip on this whole thing and understand it better? Well, the WHO chief came out and warned against trolls and conspiracy theories. Apparently that's the most important thing the WHO can be focusing on right now. Misinformation is making the work of our heroic workers even harder. I would also like to speak briefly about the importance of facts, not fear. Hey, I'm with you on that. Let's get the facts. People must have access to accurate information to protect themselves and others. Couldn't agree more. So we read down this entire BBC article where you now have an opportunity, Mr. Tedros, to come forward and say, here are the facts that we think people should know about. So we go all the way down to the bottom of this article in the BBC. What's the latest on the coronavirus? What is it? Mr. Tedros here says the virus is still concentrated in Hubei, and that over the last 4 days, there appeared to have been a slight stabilization of the number of cases. Either that, how is that useful information or accurate? However, he said it's still too early to say whether or not the virus has plateaued, as epidemics can slow down before accelerating again. And that's it. I haven't cherry-picked this. There is no other useful information for you in there. I think it's time for a definition. I mean, if the description matches, in psychology, there's a term called gaslighting, right? The World Health Organization, every time they come forward by attempting to minimize this whole thing and say, don't panic, I think they're actually making things worse, because what we need is real information. With real information, you have a chance to combat this thing and to understand how to avoid getting it. Well, the news that's just come out this morning, Chengdu is now also on lockdown. This is a very, very big, I think this is the 6th largest city in China, 14 million people or so. It's just huge. And so they're now on lockdown, and just Google mapping this real quick, we find out that it's 1,162 kilometers from Wuhan. So this is traveled really far, really fast. Talking about how the possibility of much, much higher deaths. This is satellite imagery showing elevated sulfur dioxide gas levels here on the outskirts of Wuhan. That's higher than at any other place. It's elevated compared with the rest of China. You would normally get this with certain industrial processes, or when you burn organic matter. That would include bodies in this case. So the idea that Wuhan is very much in economic lockdown, it's unlikely that this has shown up due to, I would say, commercial activities. This just came out on NBC News. I think yesterday, the Wuhan government edict, they're rounding up suspected coronavirus cases. And so these videos now are showing these Chinese authorities dragging residents from homes, putting them in boxes on the back of trucks, putting them into these large coronavirus. They're calling them hospitals, but they really look like detention centers. They've got bars on the windows. People are forcibly put into these things, and they really will turn into more mortuaries than hospitals, given the way this disease progresses. So you know what? all of this don't panic talk really sounds very familiar to me. In fact, you can do a search on old newspapers, and back in 1918, there's this article about the Spanish influenza. Here's an article saying, you know what? It's just a new name for a very old, familiar disease, which it wasn't. But when it was first sweeping around, the Spanish influenza, which appeared in Spain in May, which isn't actually true. It appeared in Kansas in the United States, but Spain was one of the only countries that was reporting on it and allowed their media to continue to report on it. The rest of the media was kind of in lockdown for a variety of reasons. Swept over this Spanish influenza has swept over the world in numerous epidemics as far back as history runs. Hey, it's just the flu. That's what they're telling you here, in essence, right? So no occasion for panic. There is no occasion for panic here. Influenza or grippe has a very low percentage of fatalities, not over 1 death out of every 400 cases. So this turned out to be absolutely bad information. It was false. And we've seen this story play out over and over again. So meet the new news, same as the old news. She was speaking this. I wrote down the transcription from this. Last night around midnight, I was transferred to this Fang something hospital, which is managed by the Army. There is no toilet, no medication provided, no hot water. Toilet is over 200 meters away outside the building. It's pouring with rain now. I was so hopeful that once moved here, I shall be cured, but it's such a mess here. Patients everywhere almost feel like they want more cross-infection. With so many people here, how can we possibly get better? No medicine, no shot, everyone is sick, some even worse than me. No isolation, just a board between us. Really heartbreaking case, and I can only imagine the suffering and the panic and the worry and the fear that accompanies all of that. Half of secondary virus infections occur in the incubation period. We have to talk about how infectious this is now. A lot of data has come out. This is really critical to talk about. So this is from a Japanese study. At least 1 of every 2 instances of human-to-human transmission of the new coronavirus is believed to occur while the patient is not yet showing symptoms, according to an estimate by a group of Japanese university researchers. The findings suggest it's difficult to contain the illness simply by isolation. So that's code speak for you can't just take a person who's sick and isolate them. You have to take people who are not sick yet, but who may have been exposed, and they've also got to be contained. And that's why you're seeing the kinds of things you're seeing in China, where people are being dragged from their homes, locked in their homes, put into isolation wards, because China knows, and whether we think this is draconian or not, honestly, the only way to prevent a disease like this from spreading is you have to contain not just the infected people, but the potentially infected people who you can't know if they're infective or not because they're asymptomatic. So that says we need to put more emphasis on prevention of infection for people with high risks, of course, but it's just everybody saying it's worse than we thought. And this has to be confirmed. But this is new information that came out yesterday, and it's that the Chinese officials warn of aerosol infection as coronavirus continues to spread. Aerosol infection. This is a really important concept here right now. There's 3 ways that a virus can be transferred. 1, direct contact, we talked about. Fomites, direct contact with surfaces that have blobs of infected material on there. 2 is by droplets. And we talked about this in the very first video I put out, so this is a concept I want to just reinforce. Droplets are fairly large particles, but that's why they say stay 1 to 2 meters away from an infected person. These droplets fall out of the air relatively quickly, but aerosols are little tiny, very, very tiny droplets in the air where this stuff can transmit over a very long range. So Chinese health officials have identified aerosols as one of the transmission routes. And so this is a really important concept. It's just crazy infective. Is spread through aerosols. So this begins to explain some of what we're seeing. So you may have seen pictures like this, right? You see these fog machines, these misting machines, these trucks driving up and down the city streets spraying something. We don't know. Maybe it's just water, but maybe it's water mixed with Clorox bleach. We don't know. We see these fog machines over here like this guy. So this is clearly a reaction that you would have if you were worried that you were having aerosol transmission of a virus, like seems to be the case now as well. This virus looks to be extremely hardy. This is continuing on that excellent article from the Epoch Times, which we just started with above. Depending on the environment, current scientific data suggests the coronavirus can survive on surfaces for up to several hours, but up to 5 days. And they found some traces of this nucleic acids, of the genetic combination for this virus on a patient's doorknobs. Thinking that it maybe spreads via droplets, you want to, obviously wash your hands, hand sanitizer, do things like that. This is a study that reviewed the literature on all available information about the persistence of human and veterinary coronaviruses. So this is ones we know about. We're going to hope that this coronavirus operates the same, because guess what? This is controllable. They're looking at inanimate surfaces as well as inactivation strategies with biocidal agents. We're getting terrible information. Look at this. Look at this from Bloomberg. As recently as February 5th, how to avoid coronavirus on flights. Forget masks, says top airline doctor. Forget masks and rubber gloves, this person says. The best way to avoid the coronavirus is frequent hand washing, according to a medical advisor to the world's airlines. Oh, I think we just found a conflict of interest. You want to know what the best way to avoid the coronavirus is on flights? Is you don't take the flight. You know how it is. You get off the plane, they turn it around, 15 minutes, it's in the air again. So this advice is just terrible advice, I believe. Just really awful. So we got a review here. Look, this isn't the flu. It's got a super high, very serious complication rate of up to 20%, at least in certain races at this point in time. It seems to be hitting Asians harder than Caucasians. We don't know why yet. Maybe that'll change. We don't know. But for areas where it's hitting, the complication rate is ridiculously high. That sets it very far apart from regular flu. And much more deadly overall, 10x more deadly, at least, maybe order of magnitude higher than that. Super high R0, way over 2, maybe as high as 4, but if it aerosolizes, maybe it's as high as measles. But what we can tell you is that this is far more infective than the regular flu. And it spreads asymptomatically. That's the really bad part of this story. Of course, spreads via droplets and fomites, we know that, but maybe and aerosols. I'm not going to decode that last part I put in there. Long incubation period, it means those with it are walking about. And the big piece here is there's no natural immunity in the herd, not on the herd. I mistyped that. There's no fire breaks here. This makes it very different from the flu. Nobody's been exposed to this before. So right now there are people in China who have been exposed, who've gotten better. They're starting to develop that first herd immunity, but we don't have any until we have this disease sweep around the world once. And there is no vaccine available. So that means there's no prior vaccines to work from, right? It's like, how they do this every year with the flu vaccine. They know how to reconfigure it. We've had the regular flu vaccines year after year, but we don't have one to work with for coronavirus. So we're not going to have one on this. So this is why it's not like the flu. Lot of reasons. And of course, the WHO wants you to think that trolls and conspiracy theorists are the biggest problem here. And your media wants you to think that it's just like the flu in too many cases still.